So hello everybody. Hope everyone's feeling good at 5:30 in the morning on a day, a New Year's Eve, the day before the New Year. I hope everyone has a wonderful New Year. So I want to finish up on Chapter 6. This is Part 2 on the term structure of interest rates. And I believe where we left off is right here, bonds with identical risk, liquidity, and tax characteristics may have different interest rates because the time remaining to maturity is different. So what they're simply saying there, as bonds get closer to maturity, okay, there's a maturity premium that you're going to get, and it's going to start to shrink. And as you know, as the bond is right at maturity, the only thing left is basically the coupon rate, right? So that's an important consideration. So if you look at treasuries, you'll always see that the time is different for different treasuries, right? So as I'm just mentioning, here's the yield curve, right? And this basically, for the most part, plots, especially with government securities, the yield on bonds with differing terms to maturity. And they may have the same risk, 3-year, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year bonds. And there's three possibilities. The yield curve can be upward sloping, flat, or inverted. Inverted normally means that we're heading for a recession, right? So occasionally in history, we've had inverted yield curves. And basically, when we headed for a recession. So, in fact, Japan has a negative interest rates, right? Japan pays negative yields, I believe. For a while, they thought that the Treasury, the Federal Reserve was going to have negative yields, and we were going to have to pay them to hold our money for safety. All right. I always need a chance for a cup of coffee. All right, so the theory of the term structure explains that basically, number one, interest rates on bonds of different maturities move together over time. So you'll see one will be higher than the other, but the curves will either go up together or down together. All right, when short-term interest rates are low, yield curves are more likely to have an upward slope. When short-term rates are high, there's a chance they could be inverted, right? So this is a recession heading our way, right? Storm clouds. And for the most part, there's been a couple instances where we said where the yield curve was sloping downward. All right, so there's three famous theories that explain the term structure of interest rates. The expectation theory explains the first two facts, right? And the segmented market theory explains the third fact. So they take the facts about interest rates, as we just talked about, these three, and basically the liquidity premium will try to combine two theories and explain all three facts. So these are the three theories: the expectation theory, the segmenting market theory, and the liquidity premium theory. All right, so you can see how they move together over time with different maturities. This is what they were talking about from 1950 over to 2015. You can see some may be higher than others, but you can see how they move together. Right, here's the 3-month, which has got a predominantly lower interest, and here's 3 to 5 year averages, and here's the 20-year bond averages, right? So you can see in general they move together, albeit at different interest rates. And this is the period I was in when I was growing up. I had to buy a house, and you can clearly see where interest rates were up, and so were mortgage rates. It was brutal. All right, so the expectation theory, the basic says the interest rate on a long-term bond will equal an average of the short-term interest rates that people expect to occur over the life of the long-term bond. And that buyers of bonds do not prefer bonds of one maturity over another. They will not hold any quantity of a bond if its expected return is less than that of another bond with a different maturity. And bondholders consider bonds with different maturities to be perfect substitutes. So let's do like an example of this expectation theory. So let the current rate on a 1-year bond is going to be 6%, and you expect the interest rate on a 1-year bond to be 8% next year. So then the average for the 2 1-year bonds is going to be simply 7%, as you can see right here, right? 6 and 8. So the interest rate on a 2-year bond must be 7% for you to be willing to purchase it, right? So all things being equal, of course. So for an investment of $1, today's interest rate is shown by IT, and the interest rate on a 1-period bond expected for the next period is IT plus 1, and here's the 2-period bond interest rate. So we've got 3 interest rates there that we just talked about. So the expected return over the 2 periods for investing in a $1 in the 2-period bond and holding it for the 2 periods is simply shown right here. And when you multiply it out, basically they show you that this term here is very small. So the expected return for holding the 2-period bond for 2 periods is 2I2T, right? Now, if 2 1-period bonds are bought, right, with the $1 investment, we go through each year, right, for each bond. And simplifying after we go through, we don't have to worry too much about this math, okay? So don't get bogged down on this math. I just want to understand the concept, right? And we simplify and we get this term right here. So both bonds will be held only if the expected returns are equal. So the 2-period rate must equal the average of the 2 1-period rates for bonds with longer maturities. So as we go through all this math again, so basically the expectation theory it explains why the term structure of interest rates changes at different times, why interest rates on bonds with different maturities move together, and there's a couple of different things here. And the one thing it can't explain is why yield curves usually slope upward. And the other theory we're going to talk about now will explain that. So here's the segmented market theory, which will hope to explain that. And what they say, bonds of different maturities, so everyone disagrees on certain things, are not substitutes at all. The interest rate for each bond with a different maturity is determined by the demand for the supply and for the supply of that bond. Investors have preferences for bonds of one maturity over another. And this is for fact 3. If investors generally prefer bonds with shorter maturities, they have less interest rate risk, right? Then this explains why yield curves usually slope upward, right? So the big thing here is investors are worried about interest rate risk, right? So the demand for those bonds sends up the price, which lowers the interest rates. All right, so the liquidity premium and preferred habitat theory basically says the interest rate on a long-term bond will equal an average of short-term interest rates expected to occur over the life of the long-term bond, plus there's a liquidity premium, right? That'll, that basically will respond to whatever the supply and demand conditions are for that bond. So this is the third theory, right? The liquidity premium and preferred habitat theories. So here's the liquidity premium theory going through a little math. And, these theories have differences about them. And finally, the preferred habitat theory says investors have a preference for bonds of one maturity over another, and that's that simple. They would be willing to buy bonds of different maturities only if they earn a somewhat higher expected return. And investors are likely to prefer short-term bonds over long-term bonds because of interest rate risk. I never met anybody, by the way, who ever bought a bond who even heard of these theories. If I say to somebody, which theory are you using to buy your bonds, they say, what are you talking about? So most investors have no idea what this is all about. So here's the way this is a great curve. It shows the relationship between the liquidity premium and expectation theories, right? And here's the expectation theory yield curve, and here's the liquidity premium theory yield curve, and it shows it quite nicely. And you can clearly see the liquidity premium that they show right here. So there's a couple other points here about liquidity premium. And basically, yield curves typically always slope upward. So here's a couple different yield curves. Different scenarios, right? Sloping upward, flat, recession type of yield curve. And here's basically some yield curves for government bonds. You'll notice we were in a recession in 1981 here, right? Short term, look at long term, they pay less interest, right? So, and this period, 06, was pretty flat, right? All right, so that's it. That pretty much knocks off chapter 6. It's an interesting chapter, a lot of theory. So, again, have a good new year and all the best.